This is Conversations on Careers and Professional Life, a podcast from the Foster School of Business, MBA Career Management Office. I'm your host, Gregory Heller. On each episode, I talk with guests from faculty and staff to students, alumni, and business leaders about the skills and strategies that can help you design a professional career that you're happy with. My guest today is Steve Jaffe, author of The Layoff Journey, From Dismissal to Discovery. In the book, Steve maps the experience of being laid off to the 7 stages of grief, offering both a candid personal reflection and a practical framework for navigating one of the most destabilizing moments in a professional's life. Steve brings more than 25 years of experience in marketing strategy across industries ranging from tourism and hospitality to B2B SaaS. Over the course of his career, he's experienced 4 layoffs himself. And what makes this conversation powerful is that he writes not as a detached observer, but as someone who has lived through the shock, the anger, the uncertainty, and ultimately the renewal that can follow a career disruption. We recorded this conversation in February of 2026 at a time when layoffs have once again become part of the professional landscape. And at the same time, job postings are down, hiring cycles take longer, and many professionals, including the students I work with, are facing extended job searches. In the episode, Steve and I talk about the Layoff Journey framework and how the stages of grief show up not only after a job loss, but also during a prolonged job search. We talk about separating identity from title, building resilience before you need it, cultivating hope in the face of rejection, and why networking, done thoughtfully and consistently, matter more than ever in a tight job market. Whether you've been laid off, are in the middle of a challenging job search, or simply want to build the kind of professional resilience that will serve you over the long term, I think you'll find this conversation on careers and professional life helpful and encouraging. Steve, welcome to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me today.
I read your book last fall before a lot of these big layoff announcements started to happen. And since I read the book in Seattle, where I am, and we're recording this at the end of February 2026, we've seen layoffs from Amazon, Microsoft, Zillow, Expedia, T-Mobile, and other firms. And if we extrapolate across the country, there have been innumerable layoffs. And as we were just talking before we started recording, it seems like it's going to be the new normal, whether it's a function of AI or tariffs or other uncertainty in the business landscape. I feel like your book is so relevant at this moment, but also maybe relevant as almost like a pre-read, an inoculation against a thing that might happen. You write that 40% of Americans have experienced a layoff. Something tells me that number is going to go up a little bit more.
Yeah.
How do you think about that and the idea that, it's one thing to read this after you get called into that office or you get that email or your badge gets turned off.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you think about your book as like an inoculation, something that people maybe should read before they get the news?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you happen to be in an industry or a field that has a propensity for layoffs, technology is certainly one of those. So is marketing. It would serve you well to maybe, like you said, give yourself like the preparation of, like, I think of this book as the in case of emergency break glass.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a relatively short read. It's a very practical guide with steps and process to get you through the stages of grief after you've been laid off. But if you want to be proactive and understand ways to insulate yourself, it's certainly valuable for that. One of the important aspects of the whole process is kind of separating your identity from your job and not letting what's printed on your business card define you as a person. And that aspect of the book is certainly relevant before you get laid off. And if you are able to define yourself as like a whole, well-rounded person, mind, body, spirit, you're not what you do. It's just one aspect of who you are. If you're able to really understand that, embrace that, and live that, it can help in the grief and potential shame and embarrassment that come from a layoff. So, yeah, there's a lot of applications for the book. You know, the stages of grief were created by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross as she observed the terminally ill patients, and they mirror the same stages of grief that people go through after divorce or death of a loved one. So, you know, any difficult life experience, this is what you can expect to go through in terms of how our bodies process trauma. So, it's a valuable read. I had no idea it was going to be this relevant as I was writing it. And in 2026, in January alone, there were more layoffs in January than there were back since 2009. And there's fewer job postings than ever. So more people are getting laid off, and the job market is the worst it's ever been. It's a very difficult time for the workforce. And as I do these podcasts internationally, it's not limited to just America. I've been talking to people in Australia and the UK and across the world, and it's an unfortunate trend.
Yeah, I want to go back to this idea of you're not just your job. And I
Mhm.
think that, we're of same generation, coming into the workforce right around the dot-com bubble and bomb. And now I think for a lot of younger folks in the workforce, there has been a little bit more of a sense of, hey, this is a balance. Like my job is my job, and then my life is my life.
Mhm.
But how can, especially high achieving folks who are really driven, how can they begin to create that separation when they're in, a high pressure work environment where they
Mhm.
want to excel? Like,
Mhm.
what are some strategies you've seen work for folks to kind of create that fire door
Yeah.
between work and the rest of life so that if work goes away, there's something left?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think our generation tended to put a bit more of our like personal identity into our jobs. And these younger generations see it more of a balance, and they see it as like, you have my time if, say between hours of like 9 to 5, but after that, like that's just my time. And there's a lot more of those boundaries that they're um, I- they expect employers to respect. And I think that's really valuable. They've seen their parents' generation get laid off, and they understand that like whatever loyalty that somebody may have had with a company tends to be one-sided. So they've insulated themselves from that. You know, our generation, our parents worked at a company for 25, 30 years, and
Hmm. Hmm.
they got a gold watch at the end. And therefore we thought that like that was our expectation. We would work someplace for 25, 30 years. I also think that the younger generations have done a great job with like the side hustle and finding like other means of income, other sources of fulfillment outside of their job, like their 9 to 5 job, so
Hmm.
that if and when they get laid off, they have something that they can fall back on. Um, that's a really great way of insulating yourself from like the economy of a layoff, but also from the like, who am I without this job? Because you have this side hustle. So I think that's fantastic.
Now, I heard you on another podcast talking about sort of the things you should be doing when you're at work so that you have a better chance when you might be looking for work, specifically networking.
Yeah.
And this is something that we work on teaching our students all the time. There's a line that I heard originally from Jordan Harbinger, this idea that dig the well before you're thirsty, that I
Yeah.
repeat a lot. And I tell students, hey, when you're a student, you've got sort of carte blanche to reach out to people and network. And I think I heard you say, when you're employed, it's a lot easier to reach out to someone in another company than when they see on LinkedIn that you're open for work, right? And you're not employed. Can you talk a little bit about how you advise people, both in the book and otherwise, how you advise people to be sort of always building that network and cultivating that network?
Yeah. The network is incredibly important. When you've been laid off, more than likely in today's job market, the next job that you're going to find is through that network.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want to be building that network when you're like kind of drowned in the ocean, and
Yeah.
you're looking for that life preserver. You want to build that while you're like safe at harbor. And the time to do that is, of course, when you're employed. Um, you want to be reaching out to those companies that you think someday you might want to work at or work for, the companies that are in your competitive set. Those are probably the easiest places that you'll land, and finding people there to connect with in your same kind of like department and function is a great way that then when you are laid off, you've already been connected with them, and you're not trying to build that connection after the fact. But you want to be sure that as you're networking, you're adding value to the relationship, and it has to be a two-way street. You don't want to just be asking um, for someone's time or for some information. Now, you want to try and give back as much as you can, and be clear about what your goal outcome is from the relationship. Sometimes it's just planting a seed, and in case, and one day, hopefully, that's a seed that will grow, and you'll be
Mm-hmm.
able
Mm-hmm.
to harvest. Um, but it's important that the network is there. Um, Again, sort of in case of emergency, break glass.
So, are there any practical, tactical pieces of advice you have for, like, let's say I'm a product manager at, company X, how do I build my network with product managers at another company? Do I just reach out? Do I try and go to events? Do I look for, the common connections? What are some advice that you would have? I mean, I know what I tell my students, but I want to hear what advice you have.
Yeah, I think events are really important. I think the face-to-face connection is really important. I think it's getting harder and harder to connect to people on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has been so inundated with like salespeople and pitches that people are really reluctant to accept connections that they don't know now. Now, if they see that you're at a competing company, maybe that you have some people in common, you're in the same types of like LinkedIn groups, that might help your chances. But I think the industry events are important. I think starting your own type of like newsletter, blog, and putting that content out on LinkedIn, for example, Substack,
Mm-hmm.
are good ways like that you can attract attention, that people would want to connect with you if you're putting out valuable information that people are finding useful. Um, that's a great way to kind of build like your own thought leadership and your own following. Um, um, that's a good way to kind of like attract people. And I think that's the most important thing, is that like attraction of like, why would somebody want to connect with me? What am I bringing to the table?
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So finding some industry events that you can go to, it's a lot harder for people to ignore you in real life than it
yeah,
is in their LinkedIn inbox. And then adding value to your network by creating content that is interesting, informative, and deliver some type of value to the people who might read it. It's advice that one of my former guests, Alexandra Samuel, back in the pandemic gave, was like, hey, talk to people, summarize the conversations, write up an article, post it on LinkedIn. Now you're sort of the center of, not the center of the universe, but you've created something that's of value that shows that you're connected and networked and
Mhm. Yep.
contributing to the community.
Okay.
Let's take a step back. As I mentioned at the top, your book looks at layoffs through Kubler-Ross's 7 stages of grief.
Mhm.
Can you talk us through just a little bit about the beginning of that process? And then I want to maybe talk about how it relates to folks who are in an extended job search, not as the result of a layoff.
Yeah. So my first layoff was in spring of 2001, and this was my first .com bubble that was bursting in the Bay Area primarily. I had a job that I thought was very secure, and I was very much bought into the myth of meritocracy, which says, if you work hard enough, you're smart enough, you'll
Mm-hmm.
succeed, and that theoretically would insulate you from a layoff. Um, I was laid off, and it took me a very long time to process that and come out the other side. My fourth layoff, about 25 years later, um, I sailed right through it. It was like water off a duck's back. It didn't really bother me that much. And as I was doing some self-reflection and trying to understand what was different between the first layoff and the fourth layoff, I started to understand the grieving process and the skills that I had learned along the way. And I thought to myself, gosh, this would be a valuable resource for people that I was laid off with at the time. There's about 20% of my company that was laid off. And I wanted to share this with them as a way of saying, listen, I've been through this. You're going to get through it. Here's some pieces of advice that I would offer as tools to help you navigate. And um, then I realized, well, if I were to turn this into a book, I could help a lot more people than the 20% that I was laid off with. And as I was framing the concepts, I saw a lot of parallels in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's research on grief and how we process grief. And I understood that that was something that I went through. And I learned how to navigate it without really knowing I was navigating the stages of grief. But when I put this all together, it became a perfect framework to understand, okay, like I'm not alone. This is really normal. There is a path through this that is like backed up by medical research and medical science and PhD level type of research. And as somebody who's been through it 4 times, I could say, like, from firsthand experience, this is legit, like I'm not coming at it from the PhD who's never been laid off, who's never worked at, a technology B2B SaaS company. Like I've lived it 4 times. So it informed kind of the path through from the moment you're laid off and you're struck with denial, like how could this happen? Um, and you move through these stages, through the anger, the bargaining, the depression, and then kind of out the other side where you get the light at the end of the tunnel with acceptance and reconstruction and renewal. Like that process becomes the framework to move from really difficult, dark days where you're carrying a lot of pain and grief to, the outcome, which is very forward looking, and sees the time as an opportunity for introspection and growth and reflection. So the goal is you don't view the layoff as a roadblock. You view it as a detour.
I love that reframing. And I think one of the other things that you talk about is maps well to sort of the Stoic principle that, we only control our reaction to things.
Yeah,
I think we have to understand what is within our control and what's not in our control.
absolutely.
And if the company makes a decision because something's happening in the market or with their share price, it's not in our control.
Uh-huh.
And in the acceptance chapter, you talk about the serenity prayer
Yeah.
And I think, I remember when I first read that, I saw it like on a taxi cab driver's dashboard, and I was like,
Uh-huh.
that's really cool. And, 20, 30 years later, I'm reading, Epictetus and the Stoics, and I'm like, oh, that's actually the same thing, like, we often talk about gravity problems with our students. There's just things that you don't control.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think this brings us to, where we are in the moment right now, where a lot of folks who are in school or preparing to get out of school, or people who have lost a job and are looking for a job, are in an extended and difficult search. You mentioned it. It's one of the worst job markets we've seen in, more than a generation.
Yeah.
Like, if we look back even at the 25 years across your 4 layoffs, you probably got rehired pretty quickly. And, we're not really seeing that same type of healthy growing job market over the last 18 months, 24 months, perhaps. Um, so how do you think this framework works for someone? Let's say an MBA student, they're high achieving. You talked about the myth of the meritocracy. They had a pretty good career probably before they decided to come back to school. The market was different when they made that decision to invest in themselves. And now they are sending out, perhaps hundreds of applications for internships or full-time jobs. They're getting screened by AI maybe, or they're doing video interviews and they're not getting callbacks. Talk a little bit about how one might apply this framework to that experience.
Yeah. I think one of the things the books, I think, does well that I really wanted to convey was the spirit of resilience and the spirit of, you get knocked down 8 times, you stand up 9. And there's an interesting parallel with, like you mentioned, these high achieving, very successful, very intelligent MBAs who, may not have dealt with a setback in life before. And now they graduate and they think that they've done all of the things. They've bought into this myth of meritocracy and think, okay, I'm ready for that job, and maybe faced with 6, 9, 12 months of a job hunt with all of the hundreds of applications and the ghosting and all of this that takes place. And um, this might be the first time in their life that they're facing this type of a setback. And there's an interesting parallel that I talk about in the book of candidates that try and undergo the Navy SEAL
Yeah,
recruitment.
I love that
Right.
you're bringing this up, because
Yeah.
I actually have that page dog-eared and my
Oh,
thumb is on it
perfect.
right now.
Perfect. Great. Yeah. So it's, the Navy SEALs is, famous for high attrition rate. For every 100 people that try out, maybe 20 actually graduate. And it's a very, very grueling, difficult process. And oftentimes, the candidates that go to be Navy SEALs are like, these like star athletes. They're very athletic, and physically they, are a good match for the Navy SEAL requirements. And typically these athletes are like, high performing. They were on the winning football team. They may have been the quarterback. They may not have like ever thrown an interception. Like, they were met with success because their talent allowed them to excel. Now, when these guys go to be the Navy SEALs, they actually have a higher attrition rate than people from a different background. And the reason for that is the first time they're being faced with life's adversities is in the buds. That's what this is called, is buds, the screening. And that's not the place to learn resilience. That's when you want to draw on life's experience that taught you resilience. And these guys are some of the first ones to drop out. Other folks that go into buds having already faced setbacks and maybe not like immediate success, and they had to really try hard to get any sort of to like excel, those were the guys that did well because when they were faced with the adversity of bugs, they already knew, okay, I've been through this before. I can get through this. I've got the skills to draw from. And it's that kind of parallel that I draw with folks that like maybe were straight A students, did really well in high school, got into their first college of choice, Ivy League school, maybe MBA. Like there weren't a lot of those setbacks. And now in the job market, you're getting the first kind of taste of what it means to get knocked down 8 times. And this is when you got to learn the idea of resilience and grit and tenacity. And I think the book does a good job in talking about and teaching those concepts.
Yeah, I remind students early in the program, I say, you've made it through 100% of your worst days,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? We have
Yeah.
to look to evidence that we have. And, again, I think there's another sort of Stoic quote, probably from Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius. It's something like, uh, it's unfortunate for the person who's never been tested because they don't know what they're capable of.
Right.
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 And I think that comes back to your reframing of this as a detour, not a dead end.
Yep.
Right. If you can't find a job or you got laid off, it's just a detour and you'll find your way back onto a path. And maybe it's a different path and it might be a better path as a result of it. It might be something that's even better suited to you and more aligned with your skills and your values than the path that you were on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are great points. I agree.
What do you think is one of the biggest misunderstandings that a job seeker has about resilience and how long the transition to finding a new job should take or might take?
Yeah. Unfortunately, in today's market, you could be faced with a 12-month job hunt. I think this isn't going to happen overnight. There are a lot of people competing for jobs out there. And unfortunately, a lot of hiring managers are using AI as a screening process, using the ATS screener. So, a human may not even see your resume before you get weeded out. It's really difficult to get your resume at the top of the inbox and get somebody to see it. All the more reason to have that network in place because there's about, people estimate a hidden job market of around 70% of jobs that never make it on a job board. That's what you want to access.
Yeah. Or by the time they do, they already have a preferred candidate and they just have to list it for compliance reasons.
Exactly. From my own experience, about 25% of my jobs came from the hidden job market where there actually wasn't even a job description written when I took the job. So it's going to take a while. This isn't a, send a resume out and get, an interview and an offer. Like it's a difficult process. And it's increasingly now more than ever, sometimes not what you know, but who you know. And you're going to find in the process that the CEO's friend's kid and the friend of the friend, and there's a lot of nepotism and there's a lot of favoritism, and you may on paper be the most qualified person. And sometimes the least qualified person may get the job for reasons outside your control. And I think that's the important thing is focus on what you can control. Getting back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, there's going to be a lot in this process that is not going to be fair and is going to be outside your control. But if you keep your head down and focus on what you can control, and how you can find small wins each day, the focus shouldn't be on, okay, I need to get another job. The focus should be on what can I do today to be a small win that will help me get the job tomorrow. It's 1,000 steps that are going to get you there. And if you focus on those 1,000 steps and doing them well and correctly, then you'll land.
Yeah, there's so many things that I want to dig into there. And, first, I just want to also acknowledge that in my experience,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I went back to back. I applied to a whole bunch of jobs and I got one of them. And every job since then has basically been through some type of network because I've known someone at the organization.
Yep.
I think this is especially complicated by the fact that AI has brought the cost of applying to jobs down, and it has brought the cost of screening out those applications down,
Yeah.
almost to zero in both cases. That
Yeah.
buying scratch off lotto tickets, I've been saying recently, right? Every once in a while, you might win $2, but you
Yeah.
spent 10 on tickets in between.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way of looking at it. Yeah.
Talking about like the small steps that you could do every day.
Yeah.
Sometimes I talk about interview skills so that I'm ready, right? But strong and prepared for when they actually get the opportunity to sit for an interview.
Yeah. A deep, unwavering trust and faith in yourself. This is when your own confidence needs to remain strong. So whatever you need to do to put gas in that tank, so your self-confidence is good, that's what you need to do. There's a whole mind, body, spirit approach to being mentally strong and healthy, so that when you face rejection over and over again, months on end, it doesn't take as much toll as it may if you're not taking care of yourself. So there's some simple things that may sound reductive, but they're incredibly important. Diet, exercise, sleep, um, a gratitude practice is incredibly important. In this time, um, a lot, you're losing a lot, right? A lot has been taken.
Yeah,
And
you're losing friends, you're losing routine,
right,
people you see every day, a place you go, a
right.
reason to get up and put pants on in the morning.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's going to be very easy to get into a spiral of the negative thinking and all the stuff that's not going well. If you can establish some type of a gratitude practice where you retrain your mind to focus on things that are going well, what's going right, what can I celebrate, what can I be happy about, and that's where the small wins come into play. Where if you set these goals and you say, okay, my goal today was I'm going to network with one person. I'm going to send out 2 resumes. At the end of the day, you met that goal, right? That feels good. You check that box. You achieved something, no matter how small it is. And that one thing, at the end of the week, that's 10 resumes and 5 networks. And at the end of the month, it starts adding up, right? So you start thinking about what can I feel good about, is a great way to retrain your mind. One of the things in the book is, the one that grows is the one that you feed. If you feed the negative thinking loop, that's going to grow. If you feed the positive thinking loop, that's the one that's going to grow, and that's the one that you want to grow.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the Cherokee parable about the two wolves in everybody.
yeah, right,
And the
right.
grandfather's telling the grandson, there's these two wolves. One's the good wolf,
Yeah.
everything's positive and happiness and joy, and the other is the negative wolf, anger, resentment, hate. And the grandchild asks, well, which wolf wins? And he says, it's the one you feed.
Right.
So
Exactly.
you got to feed that good wolf
Yep.
inside you. The small wins piece reminds me of James Clear, Atomic Habits and
Yeah.
Tiny Habits.
Yeah.
Principles of like really thinking about like what are those smallest measurable units of progress you can make.
Yes.
And
Yes.
one of the things that I tell students is, the numbers game that you want to play is probably the outreach and the networking and the going to events and all that. And you can distract yourself with these, I think someone else has described it as empty calories of job application,
Uh-huh.
like
Uh-huh.
I submitted 100 resumes this week, and that's just 100 resumes into the void. But
Yeah.
if you send out 100 emails to people you want to network with, that you have some type of connection and you write a reasonably tailored short email, you're likely to get more return on that investment
Uh-huh.
than
Uh-huh.
just dumping a bunch of resumes into the void.
Yeah, yeah. It's easy to get caught up in the trap of, okay, I need to get another job. Therefore, the quickest, like the shortest line to the other job is as many resumes as I can possibly submit. And that's where I'm going to dedicate my energy. But that's actually probably the longest line with the greatest amount of barrier. Whereas the other way is in networking, putting yourself out there, putting content that's going to be valuable, meeting people, all of those things. While you may feel like you're taking you further away because you're not actually submitting resumes on job boards, that's actually where the lowest hanging fruit is.
Yeah, I think you're totally right on that. That you might even feel when you're sending out those resumes because you're getting the screener call.
Yeah.
You're getting this intermittent reinforcement, right? The sort of slot machine effect,
Yeah.
and it keeps you coming back for more because you're like, oh, that got me something,
Right.
but it doesn't get you the job, right?
Right.
It got
Right.
you this step that you think is on the way to the job, but it didn't actually get you the offer. Whereas there's a longer term investment, a longer runway going down the path of networking with a lot of folks, figuring out what business problems they're trying to solve, how you fit within their team or their organization or their industry, and then being the person that might be at the top of their mind when they have an opening on their team. That might be 6, 8 months from now.
Right.
But then they call you, and if the other path, you spend 6, 8 months sending out, 100 resumes a week, and nothing happened, you don't have that foundation. You don't have all those seeds that you've planted out there in the world where people are going to think of you when they hear about a job or when they have a job on their team.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're coming to the end of our time here. Are there any other aspects from your experience, over 4 layoffs and, writing this book that you think are really important for people to understand about these stages of grief or in this market that we're in right now, how to begin building that resilience before you need it that you'd like to share with my listeners?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I think one of the things that I write about that I feel really, really strongly about, and this applies to a professional who's, been in the workforce for 25, 30 years. He's gone through 4 layoffs as much as it does for an MBA graduate, maybe sending resumes out for the first time. And it's the idea of hope and the need to cultivate a spirit of hope. It takes a lot of courage to navigate the stages of grief. It requires hope that tomorrow will be better than today. It takes this belief that your best days are ahead. I believe that hope forces optimism when every ounce of your being wants to be pessimistic. It allows you to imagine a future where the personal growth found in the journey will be worth it, where you'll emerge stronger. Hope is the willpower that fuels perseverance. It's the anchor that keeps the despair of rejection at bay. And it reminds you that each no brings you closer to the eventual yes. So hope is a powerful motivator. And it allows us to step into the unknown, tackle new challenges, and grow from the experience. When you're faced with 100 rejections, courage makes you send out the 101st job application, but it's hope that convinces you it's worth doing because the effort might finally pay off. So you want to be patient with yourself, understanding that hope doesn't necessarily manifest instant success, but it believes that the small steps forward will eventually lead to something bigger and better.
I think it's a great sentiment. It's also this idea we come back to about reframing. It can be easy to feel like each of those applications is, another a point or a face-off in a game, right? Like against a single opponent or adversary, and that you're falling behind in the score. But they're each individual data points. Each one is a coin flip of its own in a sense.
Yeah, right.
And that, it's not like you have fallen hopelessly behind in the score and there's only 5 minutes left in the game and there's no way that you can make up the point differential, right? Each time you're going and submitting an application, each time you're going in for an interview, it's its own contest, if you will.
Yeah, right.
And you can come back to it. And like Ted Lasso said, be a goldfish, think about the next play, right? Only focus on the next play, sort of trust the process.
Yeah.
So I think in your message today and in the book, there's a lot of emphasis on sort of the self-awareness, the introspection, the being mindful of the process, giving yourself grace. You just said it, have patience with yourself. And I think for anyone out there who's really struggling with this, it's important to find a community of people who you can also talk with, and maybe a professional that you might need to talk with, whether that is on a career coaching side, who can maybe help you get over a hump, or on a mental health side. There are people out there who can help and really address whatever specific challenge that you may be having.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good place to leave it. One thing that I do want to ask you is, where can people learn more about you and the book? The book is called The Layoff Journey, From Dismissal to Discovery. You've got a website. People can find you on LinkedIn. Why don't you let us know?
Yeah, you can go to thestevejaffe.com. You can learn about me and the book and my journey. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I also have a blog on Substack. You can find that on my website as well. There's a free chapter on the website. If you want to download a free chapter and kind of take it for a test drive before you buy it, you're welcome to do that. And I'm happy to connect with anybody if anybody's going through any of the things that we talked about today. We talked about the importance of networking, and I'd be happy to connect and network with whoever that would like. And I would just, leave everybody with the idea that if it's your door, it will open. And don't think about this as, rejection. Think about it as a redirection. If it was meant for you, it'll be.
Thank you so much for having this conversation on careers and professional life, Steve.
Thank you very much.
I took 3 important things away from this conversation with Steve. First is that career disruptions are emotional and not just logistical. Whether it's a layoff or a prolonged job search, there is a real grief process involved. Naming that and normalizing it can reduce the shame and help you move forward with more clarity and self-compassion. Second, resilience isn't built in the moment of crisis. It's built beforehand. Separating your identity from your job title, cultivating relationships before you need them, and developing habits that support your mental and physical health, those are long-term investments that pay off when the market turns. And third, progress in a difficult job market is rarely dramatic. It's cumulative. Small daily actions, thoughtful outreach, skill building, preparation, mindset work, they compound over time. The focus shouldn't just be on landing the job. It should be on becoming the kind of professional who is ready when the right opportunity appears. I'm going to put some links to earlier episodes in the show notes, including my conversations with Polo Decano about stress and resilience, self-compassion with Jane Compson, gratitude with Professor Ryan Fair, and stress and self-compassion with Professor Andy Haffenbrack. Thank you for listening to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or classmate. Help others find the show by leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Did you know that you can find Conversations on Careers and Professional Life on YouTube or Spotify? One thing you can do to help others find the show is by subscribing and rating on those platforms. Conversations on Careers and Professional Life is produced by me, Gregory Heller, with support from the Foster School of Business, Office of MBA Career Management. Learn more about the show, find show notes and past episodes, and get in touch with me at conversationsoncareers.com.